Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you for gathering here. As all of you know, it is a bittersweet year for anniversaries. It is, of course, the 25th anniversary of the bloody massacre at Tiananmen Square in Beijing. It's also the 25th anniversary of the collapse of communism in Europe and the fall of the Iron Curtain. And throughout this entire day, we will celebrate both of those anniversaries. We'll be remembering the victims as well as celebrating the triumph of liberty. It is also, this year, the 20th anniversary of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And throughout this day, we will also be highlighting past programs and future programs of our foundation. We have a full program. I hope you have received it. We will start with this ceremony. We will then follow with a luncheon in the Library of Congress and a panel discussion. The Library of Congress luncheon is by invitation only, and if you are registered for that, we will have shuttle buses taking you to the Library of Congress. And there are a number of volunteers we have today, 21 of them, who will be wearing this tag. And if you have any questions, or if you need to be escorted to the Library of Congress, or in the evening to the reception, which begins at 6 o'clock at 300 New Jersey, just please see one of these individuals and they'll escort you or get you an answer to any question you may have. At this time, I'd like to invite Reverend Canon Charles H. Knowles to pray the invocation.
As our hearts may be moved, let us pray. God, the Lord of all mercies, grant unto the souls of thy servants whose memorial we commemorate this day a place of refreshment, of blessedness, of repose, and of the glory of everlasting life. Comfort, O Lord, we pray thee, those who mourn the loss of those near and dear to them, especially those lost to the scourge of communism. Be with them in their sorrow. Give them faith to look beyond the troubles of this present time and to know that neither life nor death can separate us from the love of God. In your holy name we pray.
We are gathered here today to engage in an exercise of memory and truth-telling. As Czech novelist Milan Kundera noted, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. So this is what we are here to do this morning. It means so much for the future of our countries and the future of our world. This struggle of memory against forgetting is the reason that the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation was established 20 years ago. Not long after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the collapse of the Soviet Union, many in the West were talking about the end of history and a global final wave of democracy. But there were a few wiser individuals who knew better and countered the heady end of history thesis. Lee Edwards, Lev Dobryansky, and Zbigniew Brzezinski warned that the work of building free institutions in the former communist space still needed doing, and that although communism had fallen in Europe, communist regimes still ruled elsewhere. They understood that in order to confront both of these challenges, it was vitally important that we not forget the suffering, the humanity, and the heroism of those whom communism made its victims. And so they worked to establish the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in early 1994. But they could not have done it without the work of the late Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina and Congressman Dana Rohrabacher of California, who is with us here today. These two great legislators introduced in the House and the Senate an act authorizing our foundation to commemorate the more than 100 million victims of communism around the world. That bill was unanimously passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. A few years later, in 1999, DOC awarded our first Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom. The medal has been awarded to Ilana Bonner, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, Pope John Paul II, and many other champions of liberty, including several recipients gathered here with us today, and I would like to recognize them briefly. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, you're here. Dr. Yenyi Yang, Czech President Václav Klaus, Dr. Richard Pipes, he'll be speaking on our panel this afternoon. Dr. Ed Fulner, and we cannot forget the late Congressman Tom Lantosh, whose wonderful wife is here with us today, a human rights champion in her own right. In 2007, with the crucial financial support of so many of you, VOC constructed this memorial, the first memorial in history dedicated to all the victims of communism. We are honored to have with us today the sculptor of this memorial, Mr. Thomas Marsh. Would you please stand? At the dedication of this memorial 8 years ago, President George W. Bush stood here and honored the many millions killed by communist regimes since 1917, in the deadliest century in human history. Since the dedication of this memorial, VOC has continued to advance our mission of educating this and future generations about the ideology, history, and legacy of communism through educational initiatives, including our high school curriculum and online virtual exhibits covering the history of communist regimes around the world. Several 100,000 people from around the world have visited these sites in the past few years, which were designed by award-winning documentarian Marcus Kolga, and we're privileged to have him with us here today in the audience. Would you please stand or raise your hand? And today we are pleased to announce for the first time 2 new initiatives. The first is a site online, buildthemuseum.com. This online site is the first step toward our foundation's long-standing goal of building an international museum on communism here in Washington, D.C. I'm very pleased to announce that the government of Hungary has donated $1 million in support of this project. We thank the people of Hungary for their generosity. We are welcoming a growing number of governments, individuals, companies, and foundations, all committed to seeing that the International Museum on Communism becomes a reality, a living memorial, a vibrant institution of education and memory here in America's capital. The second project I'm pleased to announce is an oral history project called Witness. Here we will capture online and on film video interviews of those who have lived under communist regimes. Their stories will constitute an important part of the historical record for future generations. It will help those untouched by communist tyranny to understand what the reality of communism looks like. It also gives survivors of communist brutality from Russia, North Korea, to Ethiopia, and to Cuba. It gives them the chance to tell their story, to bear witness of what they saw and heard and lived through. The Witness Project will help give voice to truth. The many stories that we'll capture in these videos as part of the Witness Project will constitute but a very small part, a tiny percentage of the many millions of lives represented by this memorial. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the co-founder and chairman of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Dr. Lee Edwards. Without his steady leadership and efforts, it's very likely that this memorial would not exist. Thank you.
Well, let me begin by identifying the gentleman who has just been speaking to you. Marion Smith is the executive director and CEO of the foundation. And without him, we would not be able to do all the things that we're doing. And I just want to take this occasion to publicly thank him for his leadership, his inspiration, his understanding of this issue. And I won't tell you how young he is, but he's younger than I am. Each one of the anniversaries that we're marking this morning concerned with one thing: the brutal, bloody reality of communism, which over the last century has taken the lives of more than 100 million victims and controls the lives of over 1 billion people today. In the last 7 years, dozens of national leaders from around the world have visited this memorial to lay a wreath and pay their respects to the victims of communism in their country. And we welcome today the representatives of more than 20 foreign embassies and ethnic communities who will participate in the roll call of nations and nationalities a little later in the program. Marion mentioned the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. And I want to take just a second to say that we joined a week ago Sunday John Li Yang and other Chinese dissidents in their candlelight rally for the student victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre 25 years ago. And the bronze replica, which is before you and which you surround, is a symbol of our determination that we will never forget their sacrifice and that of the many others who refused to kowtow to communism. Sometimes we're asked, well, why do you bother? The Cold War is over. Communism is dead. To which we reply, ask the thousands of political prisoners in China's Laogai whether communism is dead. Ask Cuba's ladies in white who protest the imprisonment of political dissidents, very often their husbands, whether communism is dead. Ask the Christians and Buddhists in Vietnam who are not allowed to practice their faith whether communism is dead. Ask the people of North Korea, cut off from the rest of the world and forced to worship a maniacal dictator, whether communism is dead. If communism is dead, why do so many students here and abroad wear Che Guevara and hammer and sickle t-shirts? Why do so many professors here and abroad defend Marxism, a pseudo-religion posing as a pseudo-science and always enforced by a political dictatorship? Our Jewish brothers and sisters understand what is at stake. They understand that history must not be forgotten, lest it be repeated. They keep reminding the world of the Holocaust, crying, never again. Even so, we cannot, we must not, we will not forget the victims of communism. We will continue to tell the truth about Tiananmen Square, and the Gulag, and the Isle of Pines, and the killing fields of Cambodia, and the boat people of Vietnam and Cuba. Let us resolve, you and I, all of us, that never again will we allow so evil a tyranny as communism to terrorize and subjugate the peoples and nations of the world. Thank you. It's now my pleasure and my honor to call to the podium for remarks a great champion of freedom, a freedom fighter in her own right. So often we say that Annette Lantos, the widow of Tom Lantos, and we could not have done what we've done without Tom, but we could not do what we are presently doing without Annette. So please join me in welcoming Annette Lantos to the podium.
I'm just delighted to be here again, and I'm so grateful to see all of you here and to realize that you all hear the importance of remembering the victims of communism that unfortunately are still being perpetrated, but not of course to the extent that they were in my lifetime. When you reach your 8th decade of life, it's an exalted threshold that I had the dubious pressure of crossing 3 years ago. You often become a de facto guardian of the community's memory of the important events and lessons of the past. Of course, there is a considerable irony in being tasked to safeguard our shared memories precisely at that stage in your life when it's just beginning to fade away. I have come to realize that life is full of such little jokes, and all you can do is appreciate them. But nevertheless, I'm proud to be one of those bearing witness to a past that I personally lived through, and I feel a deep responsibility to remember and commemorate the millions of victims of communism, which is why this annual gathering is of utmost importance to me. I want to commend Dr. Lee Edwards, who has been incredibly valiant in making sure that we never forget those who were victims of one of the most brutal ideologies in history, and I want to thank him for his incredible work in this regard. These recent disturbing events in the Ukraine and increasingly widespread discussion of Putin's apparent interest in reviving the old Soviet empire, I'm reminded of the truth, William Faulkner's famous words: "The past is never dead, it is not even past." Another famous writer, Mark Twain, once wrote, "History does not only repeat itself, but it also rhymes." Many of us are deeply concerned about the echoes of the past that we are hearing in the events of the present day. Many of the most repressive governments of our day are communist regimes that continue to claim new victims. Communist North Korea is today the most awful example of repressive, violent, and failed society in which millions have died as a result of famine and millions more have been imprisoned in brutal detention camps and re-education camps for imaginary political, economic, or ideological crimes. North Korea's neighbor China has abandoned this pretense of economic equality and socialism, but it retains its iron grip on political power through the total domination of the Chinese Communist Party and the brutal repression of those who pose a risk to its control, whether they be democracy activists, Muslims, or peaceful religious movements like the Falun Gong and the house church believers. China continues to oppress the people of Tibet, and like the builders of the Berlin Wall in the past, it seeks to keep its citizens locked away from the free world of ideas on the internet through the infamous Great Firewall of China. And so, we gather here today. We are honoring not only those who suffered through the horrors of Stalin's purges and China's cultural revolution, but we are also recommitting ourselves to stand against the communist tyrannies of our day and of our own times. As you know, my late husband, Tom Lantos, was the only member of Congress who had personally lived under the political repression of both the Nazis of the right and the communists of the left. That is why he was so passionate about the importance of freedom and democracy, and why he was so proud to support the establishment of this remarkable monument. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, I'm almost 83 years old now, and sometimes I'm tempted to put down my sword, wielded for many years in defense of democracy and human rights, and instead to put up my feet and leave the task to someone else, new generation. But then I remember the words of Tom's favorite poet, Robert Frost, who wrote, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Let none of us grow drowsy and weary as we stand as watchmen on the ramparts of democracy, and let the memory of those who suffered at the hands of communist tyrants of the past strengthen us for the challenges of today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annette Lantos. I'd now like to call to the podium Frank Calzone for some brief remarks about the situation in one of the 5 countries which still labor under communism, Cuba. Frank Calzone of the Free Cuba Committee.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you all, and thank you, Mrs. Lantis. I'm delighted and honored to be here again this year on behalf of the Free Cubans, the Center for a Free Cuba. I have a very brief message, and the message is that while we're meeting here today, the new victims, the new men and women who are being tortured, who are being abused in China, in Tibet, in North Korea, in Vietnam, and in Cuba. May God protect them all. Let's pray for them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of those great legislators that I mentioned, responsible for introducing the act in the House of Representatives that authorized our foundation, is Congressman Daniel Rohrabacher. Please come.
President Klaus, nice to see you again. Today I wore a brown suit, my Reagan brown. Remember when Ronald Reagan came to town, it was such a scandal that he wore a brown suit rather than just blue and standard attire of the day. Those were very heady days for me, and I thank God that I was given the opportunity to work with President Reagan for 7 years as one of his speechwriters. And when I left the White House this last year, all I had no money, and I had no name ID because I'd been a speechwriter. We were supposed to be quiet. But all I had was 50 pictures of myself with Ronald Reagan. And my opponent outspent me about 10-1, and I won by a landslide because there is a soft spot in the heart of the American people for President Reagan, and there should be. because he did overcome what was at that time the number one threat to the peace and stability of the world and the freedom of the people of the world, and that was the Soviet communism, which had threatened so long the human race. And Ronald Reagan brought it down, and it did not just happen. Let me just note it happened because Ronald Reagan insisted on policies that led to that conclusion. And for those who think that there was just some major, surge of support here in Washington, D.C. and throughout the world that enabled us to destroy communism at its heart in the Soviet Union, that was not the case. The fact is, there were people not only on the other side, but there were people on our side fighting every step of the way, every major stand that Ronald Reagan took. There were people here in the United States, in the political world and the business world, that tried to undermine those states and those positions that he took, that eventually destroyed this number one threat to our freedom and our peace in the world. So today I remember him, and I remember those people who helped us combat the attack on Reagan. Lee Edwards is here with us, and he is one of those. Lev Dobryansky is one of those. We have many heroes who work, and Tom Lantos, such an heroic person that I had the honor to work with in Congress. The bill that was passed, that we commemorate today, didn't just happen. There were people in the United States Senate who were trying to stop this bill. And Tom and I worked very closely on the legislation that created Victims of Communism Memorial. And like with Reagan, for whatever inexplicable reason, there were people trying to undermine the attack that we were making on communism. And we had senators who tried to take this away and say, no, you cannot have a memorial to the victims of communism. And I remember one of them said, because that would create, if we did that, that in some way would create a warlike atmosphere. Well, the fact is, peace comes, as Ronald Reagan so often said, peace comes not when you're seen as weak, but when you're seen as strong and someone who advocates your basic principles. So at the very last moment, I was saying this, there was a visit that was going to happen to Russia, and it was the President of the United States needed to have something in his hands, and there was a piece of legislation, and they had to, in order to get it passed in time, they had to have what we call in our Congress unanimous consent. And that means if any member objects, they have to go back to the regular rules of order, which would have taken weeks, and the president's trip was going to be in a few days. So I told him, I said, I am going to object unless there is a portion of this legislation that helps create a Victims of Communism Memorial. So all of us were doing our part. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, and others, Tom Lantos, who was such an aggressive champion, Lev Dobryansky and Lee over there that was just constantly battling. But we were also maneuvering with it every way we did, whether it was on fighting guerrilla wars in Latin America or whether it was right here in Washington, D.C. We rid this world of the Marxist-Leninist dictatorship in the Soviet Union. I'll just leave you with one thought, and that is this. I happen to believe that today the major threat to freedom and peace in this world is radical Islam and China. And I believe that we should be reaching out to as many people who are willing to work with us in that fight as Ronald Reagan targeted the primary enemy of freedom and stability in our age. We need to make sure that we pull a coalition of people together around the world the way Reagan did to focus directly on that primary threat, radical Islam in China. So with that said, thank you all very much, and
we can show our gratitude towards those people who helped give us this memorial to the victims of communism, and we can show to the people around the world whose families were destroyed by this evil philosophy. We can show them their solidarity by making sure that we stand together and that we make sure that the threats to freedom in the future are defeated, and that a respect for the rights of human beings and that liberty and justice for all prevails in our country and throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. And on the heels of that, we'd like to highlight another legislative success, and that is just recently on your program, of course, we have Congressman Shimkus, who unfortunately had a committee meeting scheduled last minute for this hour. But he was a sponsor of a resolution in which the United States Congress has commemorated August 23rd as Black Ribbon Day in memory of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And I would like to invite the Managing Director, Carl Alto of J-Bank, to come and read the remarks of the Congressman.
Good morning. We're very happy that Congressman Shimkus was there for us to introduce and help pass the Black Ribbon Day resolution. It's very important this year because it's the 75th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signing. 25 years since the Baltic Way, when over 2 million Baltic Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians held hands in a 400-mile chain across the Baltic countries. Although Congressman Shimkus couldn't be here with us this morning, it's very important for the Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian American communities, for the Baltic countries to have this resolution, and for other countries in Central and Eastern Europe that we do not forget. And now I'll read Congressman Shimkus' remarks. Thank you for this invitation to speak at today's 20th anniversary memorial ceremony. I regret that my congressional duties have caused me to miss this important milestone and kept me from personally congratulating Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom recipients Mustafa Zhumalev and Miroslav Marnovich on this special occasion. Given recent world events, I can think of no more deserving recipients of this award today. I hope this recognition of their lifelong dedication to democracy will inspire continuing efforts to stand against the subjugation in Ukraine and around the world. Mr. Zhumalev, Mr. Marnovich, the men and women of the Maidan, and all those who have answered freedom's call know well what Czech writer Milan Kundera described as the struggle of memory against forgetting. But for those of us whose God-given right to liberty is not under constant outside threat, memorials like this are important reminders of the struggle against power. To that end, I'm pleased to inform you that legislation I introduced to create a Black Ribbon Day in remembrance of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact passed the House of Representatives last month and will likely become law later this year. This would not have been possible without tireless efforts and perseverance of people like you all here today. Thank you for all you do, and thank you again for the invitation to speak today.
And at this time, to remind us all that communism still thrives in certain places and terrorizes humans still, we had on the program Shin Jun-yuk, who is a North Korean defector living in Seoul, South Korea. He's the only known escapee from a quote-unquote total control zone grade internment camp in North Korea. Unfortunately, he is suffering from ill health this morning and is not able to join us, but his interpreter, Henry Song, is going to read his remarks. Please join us. Henry Song is U.S. Director of Inside NK, Inside North Korea. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lee Edwards, members and staff of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, distinguished guests and dignitaries, and Dr. Suzanne Schulte, who I would like to thank for participating every year to honor and represent the victims of North Korea. Thank you for the honor of inviting me to this important annual event. Today we remember and honor the victims of communism, the millions who perished in the tyranny. I ask all of you, however, this morning to remember the victims who are still suffering right this moment in North Korea. The prisoners in the political prison camps throughout North Korea who are victims of a ruthless and evil regime who deny its own citizens the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The prisoners whose lives are worse than those of animals. Every time I visit Washington, D.C., I go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. The world said never again after World War II, but never again is happening right now in North Korea. The recent report compiled by the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, led by Judge Michael Kirby, has shown the world the truly deplorable human rights situation in North Korea. We read about the refugee crisis of the refugee women in China, North Korean refugee women in China, who are sold into human trafficking rings, of North Korean men who are forced to work near slave labor work conditions, and who are hunted by the Chinese authorities and repatriated to North Korea, where they face certain punishment, imprisonment, or even death. And we know about the other human rights violations that North Korea has committed, abduction of foreign nationals, threatening and provoking the world with its nuclear ambitions. And he has urged the world, the UN, and people everywhere that we know what is going on right now, and we cannot feign ignorance, and that we must take action. How much longer must the people of North Korea suffer? How much longer must the prisoners in the political prison camps, numbering up to 200,000, suffer and live lives of utter misery and suffering until the world will take action? It is my sincere hope and desire that soon, in due time, we will gather here and not only remember and honor the past victims of communism and those who suffered under tyranny, but that we will all work together to ensure that the present suffering, the horrors that are ongoing in North Korea right now, will stop and that there will be no more victims. In closing, I want to say that though I was born in the prison camp was not born inside me. There is hope and a future and courage that we can give to the people of North Korea right now. As we remember the past, we can work towards and hope for a brighter, better future of liberty and freedom. The same hope and future I now have can be given to those suffering in North Korea. Let us work hard and join together so that day will come soon. Thank you. 감사합니다. 신동혁.
At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Yang to come and give us an update about the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square and the situation in which Chinese citizens find themselves today. Please.
Dr. Edwards, Mr. Smith, distinguished guests, dear friends. First, I want to thank you, Dr. Edwards, and Congressman Lord Barker. Of course, Mrs. Lantos. We all miss Congressman Lantos. Thanks to their wisdom, tenacity, moral courage, and passion that gave birth to the victims of a communist memorial foundation 20 years ago. I salute you, Dr. Edwards, for your prophetic vision in the selection of the goddess of democracy as an icon for this memorial to more than 1 million victims of communism, including those who died in Tiananmen Square 25 years ago. As we gather here, I'm struggling to find a fitting way, not only to recognize the sacrifice of the Tiananmen victims, but also to ask ourselves what pledge that remembrance requires of us today. I can think of no better words than Abraham Lincoln's famed Gettysburg Address. His call for renewed commitment might just as well be read today in Tiananmen Square. Lincoln said, We have come here to dedicate a portion of that field as the final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that these dead shall not have died in vain. Today, 25 years after Tiananmen Square massacre, China's leaders remain obsessed to force amnesia about that cruel crime. They strive to erase it from all discourse and published history. And even as we speak, to imprison and torment those who dare to remind China what took place and what it stands for. But China's leaders will fail. The bipartisan events here in Washington, D.C., like this one, a quarter century later, and similar events around the world make clear that, as Lincoln correctly predicted, the world can never forget what they did. The people of China are experiencing revolutionary change. Above all else, we must maintain faith in my compatriots that they will and can join the vast majority of the world's peoples who now live in free, or at least a part of free countries. An opening for change could come in the next few months, or it may take a few more years or decades, but it will come eventually. As the legendary defender of human rights, late Congress Tom Lantos said of the 1956 Hungary Revolution in his dedication here, exactly 7 years ago. The 1956 revolution was not crashed. Its victory was only delayed. I stand here 25 years after Tiananmen Square massacre to tell you that democracy is coming to China. And it will come with collective effort, including those from the international community. Let's pray that all peoples who today are still suffering under communist rule, of whatever ethnicity, whatever faith, whatever region, shall have, in Lincoln's word, a new birth of freedom. And let's commit our renewed effort to that goal. It is for us, living, our secret duty. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Yang is president and founder of Initiatives for China. I encourage you to help that organization out if you're able. At this time, I'd invite Ms. Lilia Muslimova to come to the stage. Ms. Muslimova is the spokesperson and personal secretary to Mr. Mustafa Zhimilev, who the board of directors decided to give the 2014 Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom to. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us here in Washington today, and so he has sent remarks via Ms. Muslimova. We look forward as the foundation to awarding Mr. Zhimilev the medal in person during his next visit here. But at this time, I turn it over to Ms. Muslimova to carry to you remarks from Mr. Zhimilev.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lee, Edward Lee, Chairman that you didn't hear me. Okay, and distinguished guests. It is a big honor for me to present today Mr. Mustafa Cemilov and to speak on behalf of his name. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am very sorry I could not be among you at this celebration in Washington. I am proud that Ms. Leila Muslimova, for many years our spokeswoman, could stand in front of you today. All the Crimean Tatars feel pride and gratitude for awarding me the Truman-Reagan Medal, because they understand that this award is given not to just one person, but to our whole heroic national democratic movement, one of the strongest and all nationalities embracing anti-communist movement in the Soviet world. We are heroic since, regardless of the Soviet brutal repression against our national movement, we did not share even one drop of human blood. After more than half a centuries of this peaceful resistance, we return to our homeland, the Crimea. As a part of Ukraine, I have become a member of Ukrainian parliament. For the last 25 years, we built houses, schools, and mosques, organized our national and community life. And then Russia attacked, occupied our land, and we fear we are being returned to the communist mean Russia. President Truman and Reagan understood very well what the communist dream was to democracy and humanism. When I spoke with President Barack Obama a few days ago in Warsaw, he reconfirmed that the US will not recognize the annexion of Crimea. Thank you. Also, I want to emphasize, we don't know how long the occupation of our land and degradation of our nation will last. But we strongly believe that it will depend in large part on the degree of solidarity of other nations and states. We really hope that this solidarity of democratic states will finally achieve victory of justice in our land. Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me once again, on behalf of Mustafa Cemilov, express my gratitude for such a valuable and important award. The Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom truly gives a hope, strength, and impetus to our nation and its leader not to give up, but to continue our belief that justice will prevail in homeland in the Crimean Tatars people. There is like several sentences on my own position. Crimean Tatar people for long suffering years develop resistance to pain, but we cannot accept aggression and violence, because the foundation of our national struggle and movement was always based solely on the non-violent and democratic principle. And this is our national flag. The name of this is like Tanga symbol. We have learned not to complain, but to act. We have made an impact with friends and colleagues like you, who despite the unseverance of the circumstances of life were always with us. And we never get tired of thanking them for their help. The situation in Ukraine and also in the peninsula Crimea are very dangerous. But let me express the view that everything that has happened is like a kind of litmus test for the whole international community to reform of further relations with Russia. I sincerely wish the people of this country to find a source of strength and political will for a fundamental and non-violent change the current bloody and inhuman regime. Dear Chairman Edward Lee, your decision to award our leader Mustafa Cemilov and Mr. Miroslav Marinovich is greatly appreciated. Let me emphasize that Truman Reagan Medal is a great honor for all Crimean Tatar people. I believe that the award from which resound a great word, freedom, will be a good symbol for my country, for my homeland, now in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Recent events in Ukraine and the whitewashing of the bloody history of the Soviet Union by Russian leadership at the moment makes the work of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation all the more important to keep alive an accurate memory of what occurred in those countries that lived under communism. At this time, it's my honor to introduce former President of the Czech Republic, the Honorable Václav Klaus. If you would please join me on the stage. Absolutely. President Klaus served for 2 terms as the second president of the Czech Republic, serving from 2003 to 2013. Previous to that, Mr. Klaus served as the first prime minister of an independent Czech Republic from 1993 to 1998, and Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies from 1998 to 2002. He oversaw the velvet divorce of Czechoslovakia and was a champion of market reform in that part of the world. It's our pleasure to welcome you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Edwards, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I am really honored to be at this place at this moment. The statue of the goddess of democracy, standing here only 7 years, has already become an integral part of this city. Today's commemoration, as was mentioned already, puts together several important things. The 20th anniversary of the founding of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, the 7th anniversary of the unveiling of the Goddess of Democracy statue by President George W. Bush, the 27th anniversary of President Ronald Reagan's historic Berlin speech, at which he famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And last but not least, the unforgettable memory of the Tiananmen Square massacre, where the original statue was erected by Chinese students in May 1989. As someone who was for decades locked inside communist Czechoslovakia and remembers both Ronald Reagan's speech and Tiananmen Square atrocities still from there, I feel very strongly about all these events, and I am glad to be able to use this opportunity to express my gratitude to all of you for keeping the memory of victims of communism alive and for not letting communism be forgotten. I was highly honored in October last year when the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation gave me the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom. In my speech on that occasion, I said that the tragedies connected with communism must not be marginalized, must not be misinterpreted or even excused, and what I would like to stress, must not be taken as an unrepeatable aberration which happened more or less by accident and can never return. I am convinced that I am not alone who sees new dangers around us in the current era. We shouldn't be misled by the fact that these dangers do not use the term communism as their headline or as their main idea. When we look at the impressive statue of the goddess of democracy, we shouldn't only look back. Democracy is weakened, attacked, and endangered in many places all over the world now. The disregard for democracy appears in different forms, often is in a disguise which hides its real nature. We are confronted with new popular isms that have very threatening undertones. We are confronted with softer attacks on democracy in places where there is nominally a democratic political system. And we should not only look at the residual totalitarian states where the disregard for democracy is easily detected. We are witnesses of many examples of that. Let's mention many African countries, various Middle East countries, and last but not least, Ukraine. I am very sad about what is going on in Ukraine and with Ukraine. The situation there should not be misinterpreted. This unfortunate country, the country with many different and sometimes conflicting roots, affiliations and allegiances, a country which has not succeeded in making a thoroughgoing post-communist transformation, both in political and economic sense, has been used as an instrument in the confrontation between the West and the East. This is a role this country does not deserve, especially the people there who went through tragic decades of communism do not deserve it. We should also look, I am from Europe, we should also look closer to us. The situation in Europe should not be underestimated. Many of us in Europe, and recent elections to the European Parliament demonstrated it very clearly, feel the growing democratic deficit there and are afraid it could lead to the return of ideas as well as procedures and mechanisms which will lead us backwards, not forwards. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today, and let me repeat my today's message. We have to concentrate on fighting communism in the new reincarnations we are surrounded by these days. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Each year, the board of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation considers one of our most important questions. To whom should this year's Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom be given? Who has demonstrated a lifelong commitment to defending freedom and democracy and opposing communism and all forms of tyranny? Some years the decision is easily arrived at, and we honor such champions of liberty as Václav Havel, Lech Walesa, St. John Paul II, Tom Lantos, Elena Bonner, Armando Valladares, and Václav Klaus. Other years there is a more extended discussion as we carefully examine the careers and accomplishments of the nominees. This year there was no debate. By reason of his 10 years of imprisonment for agitation against the communist regime, as the founder of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group, as the chairman of the Ukrainian chapter of Amnesty International, as a celebrated author, as an ardent spokesman for human rights and democracy in his homeland, as a popular professor and teacher and dean, as a man of deep faith, Miroslav Marinovich was a unanimous choice to receive the 2014 Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom. Mr. Mladanovich is an inspiration to the people of Ukraine at a critical moment, as we've heard from our speakers this morning, when leadership in and out of public office is urgently needed to preserve and protect the sovereignty, independence, and constitutional rights of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce to you the recipient of the 2014 Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom, Mr. Mladoslav Mladanovich of Ukraine.
Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, most honorable members of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, distinguished guests. It is a great honor for me to receive the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom, and I want to thank the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for its dedicated work to overcome the heritage of communism. I'm glad to share this honor with my good friend, the former prisoner of conscience, and now the unquestioned leader of Crimea Tatars, Mustafa Jamilin. Just as we used to share the bitterness of communist persecutions in the past. Thank you also for recognizing the colors of the Ukrainian flag among many others, bright and attractive. Our country is enduring challenges no one had expected for the 21st century. The annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation has become a symbol of a political outdatedness that now occupies the minds of the modern Russian elite, and of a challenging time machine for the whole world. Unfortunately, this occupation also has become the symbol of new sufferings for both our peoples, Ukrainian and Crimea Tatars, neither of whom have yet recovered from the devastating period of communist dictatorship and post-communist authoritarianism. 25 years ago, at the peak of the enthusiasm inspired by the transformations of that annus mirabilis, Europe suggested that a Nuremberg II for communist crimes would be a costly mistake. At that time, it was widely believed that what was needed was rather a strict emphasis on the future, not on the past. Now we understand that this was a costly utopian dream, or rather simply the postponement of a confrontation with the dangers looming in the future. It was equivalent to leaving seeds in weeds in the field and hoping that they would never germinate. The aggression of Putin's regime against Ukraine and its threats addressed to other post-Soviet countries show very clearly now that we have reaped the fruits of our own blindness. Communism was an illusion that captured the imagination of many nations and many generations. Overcoming the dangerous Soviet communist heritage that is blossoming in the form of Putinism requires nothing less than the solidarity of the whole world. We must confront these aspects of the past and, acting in coordination and concord, square these accounts. Let me reinterpret the thought which was already raised here at this place a year ago. We do not want the Cold War to be restored, and do not want to be hostile to the Russians themselves. By the way, the Ukrainian Maidan was anti-Putin, not anti-Russian. Actually, the Russians are not the first nation seduced by the seeming effectiveness of military solutions in the restoration of a national pride. However, it is in the interest of the Russian nation, as it is in the interest of all other nations traumatized by communist rule, to criminalize the communist actions in a legal sense and to repent these crimes in a moral sense. To overcome the present menace to our values, we need to change our perspective and to develop a stand of solidarity for values and principles which constitute the democratic system that we cannot sacrifice. This was the world's message at the time when Mustafa and I were incarcerated in a camp with 7 rows of barbed wire. This is the same message of ours as I stand here on the free land of blessed America. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time in the program for the roll call of nations. We have a record number of wreaths being laid today, 44, representing embassies and ethnic groups and human rights organizations from around the world. If I could ask those of you who are laying a wreath to please line up along this sidewalk, and the gentleman there with his hand raised will direct you where to go. While that is occurring, I have a few remarks to represent the younger generation here. We've heard today about the human rights abuses in Cuba and North Korea and China. China, for example, has made wonderful use of new technology as a way of exercising even more total control over its population. Perhaps we are just too used to dumb communism, and we don't easily recognize smart communism. Some refer now to market Leninism to describe what is taking place in China. They describe market Leninism as an alternative to democratic government and the rule of law. Others suggest that a younger generation, so-called millennial Marxists, will finally make the ideas of communism work in practice, despite the deadly consequences of that failed ideology every time it has been tried. Myself and many of the younger members of our audience, almost 300 people here today, by the way, were too young to have been Cold Warriors. But if there is a new Marxist moment, as a Time magazine edition recently suggested, or a quote-unquote Communism 2.0, as others have predicted, you can rest assured that there will also be an anti-communism 2.0, and that VOC will be among those leading the charge in defense of liberty and human dignity. VOC will continue working to preserve the memory of communism's many victims, as well as advocating for the freedom and human rights of those still suffering under communist rule. Even as we celebrate the triumph of liberty in Europe 25 years ago, we cannot forget those still yearning for liberty today. As T.S. Eliot said, there's no such thing as a lost cause. because there is no such thing as a gained cause. But ladies and gentlemen, there are causes worth fighting for, and all of us here are engaged in the great cause of freedom. At this time, we will begin the roll call of nations. As the name of your organization or the individual's name is called, please make your way and lay your wreath where directed near the memorial. The Embassy of the Republic of Bulgaria. The Royal Embassy of Cambodia. The Embassy of the Republic of Croatia. Embassy of the Czech Republic. Embassy of Estonia. Embassy of Georgia. Embassy of Hungary. Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania.
You will say the Czech Republic.
Okay, if you turn around. Where should we put that? Where do we put it? All right. On the edge, Embassy of the Czech Republic. And ladies and gentlemen, the wreaths will begin to form a wall sort of in front of the memorial. So please lay the wreaths in that way. Embassy of Moldova.
Chcete teď s ním mluvit? Teď s ním
Embassy of the Republic of Poland. Embassy of Romania.
Menjünk át a másik oldalára.
Embassy of Latvia. Embassy of the Slovak Republic. Embassy of Albania. Embassy of Norway. Embassy of Sweden. Embassy of Ukraine. That concludes the embassies. We now move on to other groups. The Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office and World League for Freedom and Democracy. The Republic of China on Taiwan. The American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1812, Voice of America, and the VOA China branch, in memory of those who perished on Tiananmen Square and countless others. The Belarusian American Association.
Excuse me. Excuse me, ma'am.
Car Workplaces. The National Captive Nations Committee. The Foundation for Christian Civilization. Friends of the Imperial City of Huan-Tulu. Initiatives for China. Inside North Korea. the North Korean Freedom Coalition, the International Committee for Crimea, the American Latvian Association, World Federation of Free Latvians, Spectrum Human Rights Alliance, Union for Lao Nation and Study of Research Center on Laos and Asia, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Women's Rights Without Frontiers, for the 400 million lives lost prevented by China's one-child policy. Mr. and Mrs. Brandt and Charlotte Bassett. Dr. and Mrs. Janos and Linda Horvat, Hungary, 1947. The Honorable and Mrs. J. William Mittendorf II. Doctors Roger and Juliana Pilon. Mr. Jensen Deroche in memory of Kulaks and Cossacks of Ukraine and Russia. Mr. Ilya Shapiro for all those souls who were lost and never were. We also have one or two anonymous wreaths in memory of, and I quote, to those still suffering under communism. Mr. Alexander Alafiris, on behalf of Greek victims of communism. And the Albanian American Freedom House. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our roll call of nations. No, it doesn't. Okay. There are even more. Ms. N.C. Bowman, International Committee for Crimea. Free Cubans. We can stay here all day. That concludes the roll call of nations lighting ceremony, a record number of wreaths laid in memory of the many millions of victims of communism from many different nations. At this time, I'd like to invite the Reverend Knowles to come and offer a blessing.
Our help is in the name of the Lord who has made heaven and earth. Let us pray. The Lord God Almighty, bless this memorial, that here may abide purity, victory, strength, humility, goodness, meekness, fulfillment of the law. Let thy blessing remain on this memorial and all who shall visit here now and evermore. Amen.
That concludes this 7th annual ceremony. We hope that all of you will join us at 3 o'clock in the Library of Congress for a panel discussion about the history and legacy of communism in Europe. And then we also invite you to join us at 6 p.m. this evening, 2 blocks up New Jersey Avenue at 300 New Jersey for a rooftop reception this evening. We'll be hearing from a number of other champions of liberty and long remarks from our Truman Medal of Freedom recipient, Mr. Miroslav Marinovich. Thank you all for coming, for remembering. God bless.